So what's the difference between a traditional help desk and a modern IT service desk?
A traditional help desk would very much be someone on the end of the phone, an email, talking you through what we would refer to as a break fix. So, someone's called up, they've got a problem. Nowadays, what we're looking at is focusing more on problem management, looking at trends and making sure that issues are fixed before they arise.
How do we think that transitioning impacts internally?
The service desk is the mouth and the face of the IT service, a primordial soup, if you will, of people growing their careers. If you align your skills correctly and you start investing in your staff, you see a much more healthier retention rate. You want a good work environment that allows people to flex their brain as well as spread their wings.
What does the journey look like from a traditional help desk into the modern day IT service desk?
So the first challenge is being able to make sure that people understand the goal and give them the understanding. Bring them along for the journey. The famous adage of culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Hi, welcome to the Cantium Podcast in partnership with Public Sector Focus. My name's Sam McLoughlin, I'm the Assistant Management Lead at Cantium, and I'm here with Adam Knapp, the Head of the Service Desk. Today we'll be discussing the evolution of the IT Service Desk and the huge impact that modernisation can have for organisations. So Adam, what are some of the common challenges that public sector organisations face with their current IT service desks?
First up would probably be automation. There's a large drive at the moment within the industry to automate as much as you can. And that comes with its own individual challenges, particularly around customer experience and customer journey. It really starts to become an unmanageable beast when you just let AI run wild. And a lot of people use that term loosely, I think, in the sense that they think it can fix every problem. But it certainly is one of the areas that we need to target where we're using it to make sure that we're getting the most benefit out of it. Obviously, with the public sector, I think it would be remiss if we didn't mention budget cuts. There's a large challenge within the public sector. And to be honest with you, across the entire industry, there's budget restrictions. And that really limits our ability to invest proactively, but also where we apportion our budget and how we target that is a really, really big part of some of the challenges we're facing.
And IT just isn't cheap, is it?
It's not. It really isn't. I think you end up in that situation where what is it you want to target? Are you going for best in service? And if you are going for best in service, that comes with its associated costs. But also you do have that improved support, that improved customer experience. You've got to really balance where it is you want to target. And I think that's probably one of the largest challenges is in a sector where there is such a broad spectrum of support. Being targeted you can get lost in the woods, and that's a real challenge.
So what's the difference between a traditional help desk and a modern IT service desk?
So a traditional help desk, if you will, would very much be someone on the end of the phone, or the end of an email talking you through what we would refer to as a break fix. So, someone's called up, they've got a problem with their Outlook, or they've got a problem with something in the internet, or whatever it is. And we would fix that issue. And more often than not, 6, 12, 18 months later, that same issue would arise for the user and they'd come back and fix it. Nowadays, what we're looking at is focusing more on problem management, looking at trends and making sure that issues are fixed before they arise, which obviously leans on the customer experience side, making sure that proactively we're fixing issues for people, but looking at it holistically and making sure that any of the trends that are emerging are fixed at the root cause, rather than having to rely on customers telling us what the problem is. So things like Intune and Microsoft Azure AD, they allow us to monitor the estate and report on the back end before the user even knows there's a problem. And that's where the new modern service desk is going to sort of remove. It's not necessarily about removing engineers from the end of the phone, because I think you're always going to have that. It's more about looking at where are the trends and what can we fix before they happen, and making sure the users don't have to have an outage.
So how does transitioning from to a modern IT service desk improve service delivery for our customers?
One of the benefits to making sure that you are being more proactive and that modern service desk offering that we speak about is efficiencies and cost savings. So it's really good to be able to take what your existing service desk is and try and realign it to something that is a bit more targeted. So you aren't necessarily waiting on that reactive support, as I say, you're being proactive. So you can invest your time. It's not about necessarily where you can cut, it's about where you can assign your time and apportion the workload. It allows you to really see where your problems are and then target and fix them. And I think that's something that's really quite hard to do for a number of public sector organizations. Any organization that's going through that modernization is starting to see where they actually need to start seeing their focus and putting it. Things like Azure and cloud-based systems, obviously, as they progress and they become more prevalent, we're seeing that we haven't necessarily had the skills available there. So now we're able to identify where our shortfalls are and where we need to bring ourselves up.
When talking about people's skills, how do we think that transitioning impacts internally, so members of staff?
So one of the great things about giving industry standard skills and bringing people's skills up is we can see a really good level of retention across the service desk. What would traditionally be an entry-level position for IT and has quite a high turnover rate. If you align your skills correctly and you start investing in your staff, you see a much more healthier retention rate and you see people enjoying their work. And ultimately, that's really what you want for your service desk. You want a good work environment that allows people to flex their brain as well as spread their wings, to put it in a really weird way. They're able to improvise, they're able to understand, and you only get that when you do invest in those skills and give people those industry standard qualifications and best practice sort of knowledge. And that's really important to see on a service desk. And it's quite rewarding to have people come from what would potentially be a non-IT background or would be their first time job, to see them start to become an engineer and find their feet in their career. That's really important for the service desk, really important.
And it can just give you an idea of where you might want to go as well. Gives you a little insight into certain areas and then they can progress on them in the future. So,
yeah, I think you end up, it tends to be that melting pot for an IT service. The service desk is the mouth and the face of the IT service. So giving people that opportunity to, as you say, see where they want to go. Do they prefer the more technical side? Would they like to go into more leadership? And then the service desk is a melting pot of that, a primordial soup, if you will, of people growing their careers. And I think that's super rewarding, just for anyone on the service desk. Would thoroughly recommend.
Absolutely. And seeing people develop themselves, I think, is really exciting, and seeing where the job can take them. So what does the journey look like when you're doing the transition from a traditional help desk into the modern day IT service desk?
I think the first thing to bear in mind is, what is the goal? What is the modernization goal? Are you trying to fix a problem that is because you are set with legacy systems or you're set in a legacy environment? Because if it is, there are some other ways you can go about doing it. I think the biggest pitfall becomes culture. So particularly on a traditional service desk where you have a large amount of staff, if those people aren't on board with what it is you want to do, it's going to fail. The famous adage of culture eats strategy for breakfast. If your team aren't on board with what is happening, they are going to drop it straight away. So the first challenge is being able to make sure that people understand the goal and give them the understanding. Bring them along for the journey. It's not just about, I'm doing this because I want to. It has to have a very clear goal with a really clear metric. So that's the first part, is making sure people are on board. The second part is aligning your accountabilities. You need to be able to understand what teams deal with what. And that doesn't necessarily have to be customer orientated. So you don't have to worry about, I want person A dealing with customer A and person B dealing with customer B. What you need to do is say, this is your function and this is what you own, and you deliver it across our client base where possible, obviously. So giving those accountabilities, and again, that comes back to what we were talking about, people being able to see what the bigger picture is and what they actually want to do and where they can go. I think you're probably just as best suited to answer this. So I think technology and the supporting technology for that, and how we actually transition out of, say, something like ServiceNow, where we have it used to work for all of the old systems. Now we've got a whole new organization structure, how that supports us. And, you were pivotal in helping us transition into that. How did you find that?
I think there was just so much involved. And whilst we had an idea at the very beginning of, aligning, like which forms went to which teams and who should be dealing with everything, it was really, really important to know the processes already and work out how we were going to be changing them. And even though we spent a lot of time trying to get everything right, a lot of user acceptance testing was needed. And if you don't do enough testing, then mistakes can be made. And I think we did a lot of testing. And even then we had time further down the line, like even a couple of months, we then had to do a little bit of regression testing and just make sure, looking at all of our scripts, our business rules, and checking where things should be going and if there was anything that we'd missed. And unfortunately, there were a few things that were missed. So I just think for other companies looking to do this in the future, just setting out all of your plans at the very, very beginning and just having a really good structure is just so important. But yeah, it was a good test.
I think if you could go back to when I first said to you, I'd really like some changes, what would you have said?
Maybe having some experts from different areas just to make sure that we hadn't missed anything. I think because it's easy when you're not in the nitty gritty of the role. So maybe including the people actually doing the do, because they're noticing things that maybe when you're managing staff that you won't pick up on. So it's just, it's important to include key people to get the right results.
Yeah, the UAT is a real sort of important part of that tool set, isn't it? Getting people who need to be the ones who are using it, making sure they are doing it. And I think you're always striking that balance when it comes to that transition between users doing the do and users testing what it's going to be like in the future. So, I mean, I'm not intending on doing this anytime again soon. But obviously for anyone who is doing it, then 100% make sure you get your testing down.
And give yourself more time than you need, because even, everyone always tries to rush these things. We're always trying to meet really tight deadlines. I get the importance of why it needs to be done and why it should be done quicker. But ultimately, you just need more time sometimes.
And I think that's what I was talking about in terms of what does the transition look like outside of the legal and procedural stuff that you've got to do. There is that bedding in and allowing time for that organic change to happen.
In your experience, how does the modern service desk support not just IT, but the entire organization's goals?
We touched on it earlier on, and I think, the service desk for a very long time, and it will continue to be, is very much that crucible in which engineers are forged. And if you do the service desk right and you nail down that sort of skills retention and that progression, you're able to support your organization's growth. In terms of more skills, better engineers allow you to provide a much better service to your customers. It allows you to get better customer experience, but it also underpins your career progression strategy. So if you invest heavily in the service desk, which obviously I would say everyone should, you will see the benefit to your wider organization and your wider support function, because you'll be nurturing that talent. You'll be bringing people along for a journey, and you'll be giving them the opportunities to build a career. I think we've certainly seen a change in recruitment since post-COVID, where employers like to see exposure to a number of different environments, where we were before in terms of looking at a CV. If you saw, 10 years on a CV of one job, you might think that shows loyalty. Whereas now I think there's a drive to see people having different exposures. But for me, and this could be, me being old-fashioned, I suspect, I like to see someone who wants to build and grow their career. And I think at Cantium we do a really great job of nurturing that talent. And I think, you and I both have come from support roles. We've come along a very interesting journey, I think is fair to say. I was on the first line teams, you were on the child supports applications. If you maintain that healthy ability to bring people through, not only do you as an organization retain that knowledge, that sort of functional knowledge, but organizationally as well, in terms of legacy systems, it's much easier. The wheels are greased, if you will, to be able to get to the end point, particularly when it comes to resolutions, much quicker. And I think in return, the better you do in terms of investing in the technology and the people that are on there, you can deliver that value back to the customer. Because ultimately, if you have a bad experience with a restaurant, if the food's bad, if the server's really good, it kind of mitigates it somewhat. But vice versa, the food could be really good, but if the waiter is rude or the waiting staff are not great, your experience is going to be mired by that. And I think that's the prism through which I see it.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to organisations that come up against a hesitance to transition to a modern service desk model?
I think clarity is probably the first thing I would say. Clarity is paramount when it comes to being able to deliver your message and your goal of where you want to go, because you need to be able to show them, what are we doing this for? It's not just a shake up for shake up's sake. It's not just a modernization because we like the word modernization. It has to be for a very clear reason. You have to be able to articulate that. Otherwise, it will just get lost in the mire. You've got to do it collaboratively. You spoke about it earlier on. It can't just be one person in a room designing it in a vacuum. You need to understand who's delivering the service, who's consuming the service. It can't just be the tail wagging the dog. You've got to understand, what does your client base want? What do they need to get out of their service? And what do you want to do to deliver it? So it can't just be yourself. And that comes back to also allowing everyone to have somewhat of a say. I think, given the experience of the transition that we've done in the last 20 months, it can be difficult to invite contribution. I think it opens up healthy challenge, but it also opens up the ability for something to become designed by committee, which ultimately, isn't always the best way to go. So being collaborative doesn't always mean that everyone gets to get what they want. It means that everyone has that say. And I think that's really, really important, to give people the opportunity to feed into that process, because again, it supports that culture and it supports that change. If people feel like they've got skin in the game, for want of a better word, they're able to feel like there's some ownership over it. But after that, making sure that you're constantly engaging with that process still. If you design your service desk and you design it around a modern structure, and you transition on day one, that transition phase doesn't end there. It has to carry on. We are, as I say, 10, 12 months into our transition now, where we completely modernized, but we're still engaging with users and engineers alike to make sure that the changes that we did have worked. And you shouldn't be afraid to be able to say, okay, that didn't work. That wasn't great. That didn't go the way we planned. How do we pivot and how do we change? And that's probably been one of the biggest challenges that we've had, I think, just because you don't know what's going to be under the rock you're lifting. And that's been, fun, I think, is probably the word I'd say, but there's probably some other words I could choose as well.
I think it's great though, because you've came from a job where you've started at the bottom and you've worked your way up. So you know how the members of the service desk are feeling. You've done that job already. So, and you've transitioned through. So you might have an understanding of the worries or concerns that they're having. So you always will take that into account, and you know what kinds of ideas you had when you were doing that role. So I think it's really good because they've had your support. And I think when you're doing a transition like this, it's important to make sure that you're supporting the staff that are going through it. And that's really, really important, I think, for companies to make sure that they do that.
I couldn't agree more. They are the beating heart of the company. They are the people who know what they do, and they know that they do what they know what they do well. And if you ignore it, you're setting yourself out to fall. You really are. You've got to be engaged with the staff, and you've got to make sure that everyone is on board with it and that they know what is clear for them. I think, you're absolutely right.
Happy staff equals happy customers.
Yeah, and look, you can't always make everyone happy. It's not always going to be one of those situations. But again, that's how you manage that message. How do you follow that transition plan and bring people along to see where it is you're going? And that
listen to,
listen to is a really good. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Making sure people do feel listened to, and it's not just talk at me and then off you go. It's let's talk about this. Let's understand where the challenges are, where your pinch points are. And as I say, the modernization part of it really, as you change to a more modern solution in terms of things like AI automation and chatbots, your customer base, do they want that? Is that something they're going to engage with? Do they even need it? I personally prefer chat for almost everything I do, unless I want something done straight away. I will use chat for all of my service providers. But if you've got a client base that hate chat or can't actually access chat, remote workers, people that aren't necessarily sitting at their desk, being able to make sure you can open those channels and close those channels off where needed to is really important.
So talking about automation, are there any other trends that you think we need to, our customers need to be aware about, and how that will shape the service desk models, and what companies maybe should do to prepare for that?
I think AI obviously is that buzzword. We're sort of seeing that very quick jump to automation and AI, and where we can find efficiencies, cost savings. And I think one of the challenges to that will be the pendulum swing. So, a lot of things in life, when something comes up that's new and shiny, or something that's popular, you'll see that cultural and societal pendulum swing to invest heavily in that. I want that generative AI, I want that chatbot. But actually what we're starting to see now is a swing back. So where the service desks have had a large lean on automated systems, their customer satisfaction tends to drop down. And there's going to be that challenge to tread the line between where are you opening your channels and giving your customers the ability to contact you in however they see fit, versus the customer experience and the customer journey. And I think that's always a fine line to tread. I don't know about you. You do a lot of work with the chat in service now as well. Would you prefer to talk to a person, or would you prefer to have an automated chat?
I personally like to talk to a person. However, I know the importance of being able to get on board with dealing with AI. Speaking to a bot, if I'm ringing up a provider, sometimes you feel like, oh, I'm just going through the motions, because ultimately I want to get to a person at the other end. However, you can get a really good bot that's been set up. It will direct you to a document that you need, that will give you the answer that you want without the need to take up a resource on a service desk. So that's really important. But it does depend on the customer. You need to know who your customer base is and know if they're going to be engaging with that bot. Because if they're not going to, then it's a waste of the company's time. We need to make it so that it appeals to those consumers.
Yeah, and as you know, there's a lot of work that goes into making that chatbot actually feel like it's able to do what we want it to do. So that investment, and I think, you touched there on work not necessarily being needed to be done by an engineer. And I think a lot of people tend to see automation as the enemy of the workforce, where actually it really isn't. We've seen some of our teams grow since automation has come in, because they've been able to look at things like shift left, or they've been able to focus on proactive tasks. That comes back to that modern service desk that we're talking about, where do you want your service to be reactive to your user base, or would you rather your service provider proactively fixed any of the issues that you've got. And proactive in the past has been really expensive. And now with things like AI and automation, obviously you've got that initial outset cost, but it does empower your workforce to be able to then go out and say, right, okay, I don't need to deal with those easy repeatable tasks. I'm going to look at the more complex stuff that's affecting wider user groups, and supporting things like problem management. So that's really, really, important.
It's given the gift of time, which is priceless.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is.
Thank you so much, Adam. That's been really interesting. And I hope that any companies that are listening can take some of this advice and implement it in their own organisations.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Cantium Podcast in partnership with Public Sector Focus, please subscribe wherever you're listening or by visiting www.cantium.solutions.